Hello, welcome. Today I'll be narrating the book Beasts of the Prey. So let's begin with the part 1, and it is Good Spirits. The hut reeked of death. It was a nauseating smell, both fetid and sickly sweet, thick in the dust as it filled Koffi's lungs. A quarter hour had passed since she had last moved. Her legs were stiff, her mouth dry, every so often her stomach twisted, threatening revolt. But it was no matter. She kept still as stone. Her eyes were fixed on what lay mere feet from her across the worn dirt floor. The victim. The boy's name was Sahil. Koffi hadn't worked with him in the night zoo long, but she recognized his bare face. Mahogany, brown like her own, framed by tight black curls. In life he would had a crooked smile, an obnoxious braying laugh, not unlike that of a donkey. Those things had abandoned him in death. She studied his lanky frame. As was Jeet practice, most of his body was shrouded, but dried blood still stained the white linen in places, hints of the gruesome wounds beneath. She couldn't see them, but she knew they were there. The scratches, the bite marks. From the darkest corners of her mind, a chilling image grew vivid. She imagined Sahil stumbling through a jungle, clumsy, oblivious to what waited for him among the vines. She envisioned a grotesque creature stalking forward in the moonlight, tongue darting between serrated teeth as it eyed easy prey. She heard the scream. A violent shudder racked her body then. Despite the muggy heat, if the rumors she had heard earlier were true, Sahil's manner of death had been neither a quick nor a painless affair. Cough. Across the stuffy hut, Mama was on her knees beside Sahil's body, staring at the tattered blanket before it. On it were 6 crudely carved wooden figurines of animals: a heron, a crocodile, a jackal, a serpent, a dove, and a hippo. One familiar for each god. The oil lamp to her right bathed one side of her face in lambent light. The other was cast in shadow. It's time. Koffi hesitated. She would agree to come here and offer parting rites for Sahil, as Jeet custom called for, but the thought of getting any closer to the core unnerved her. At a sharp glance from Mama, however, she moved to kneel with her. Together they lit their fingers, brushed each of their figurines before folding their hands. Carry him. Mama whispered the prayer, carry him to his ancestors in the Godlands. Their heads were still bowed when Koffi asked the question in a murmur, is it true? Mama cracked a wary eye. Koffi. Some of the others were talking. Koffi went on before her mother could stop her. They said others were killed, that... Hush! Mama's head snapped up, and she swatted the words away like flies. Mind your tongue when you speak of the dead, lest you bring them misfortune. Koffi pursued her lips. It was said that to pass into the next life, one of the gods' animal familiars represented by the figurines before them carried each soul to the god of death, Fedu. Each soul then had to pay Fedu before being carried on to paradise in the Godlands. A soul with no money to pay for passage, with doom to walk the earth as a lost spirit for all eternity. Like Koffi, Sahil had been a beastkeeper indentured to the night zoo, which meant he would had little money in life and likely had even less in death. If faith held true, this meant his misfortunes had only just begun, whether she minded her tongue or not. She had started to say so when the hut's straw door opened. A stout woman with salt and pepper cornrows stuck her head inside. Her simple tunic was identical to theirs, grey and hemmed just below the knee. At the sight of them, she wrinkled her nose. Time to go. Mama gestures to the figurines. We are not finished. You have had ample time for this nonsense. The woman waved a dismissive hand. She spoke Zamani, the language of East, like them, but her Jaba dialect gave her words a sharp, clicking quality. The boy's dead, praying to twice won't change that, and there's work yet to be done before the show, which Baaz expects to be in on time. Mama gave a resigned nod. Together she and Koffi stood, but once the woman had left again, they both looked back to Sahil. If not for the bloodied shroud, he could have been sleeping. We'll return and finish our prayers later before they bury him, said Mama. He deserves that much. Koffi tugged at her tunic, frayed neckline, trying to temper a moment's guilt. Everyone else in the night zoo had already offered prayers for Sahil, but she would beg Mama to wait. She would blame course, then a headache, but the truth was she hadn't wanted to see Sahil like this, broken and hollow and devoid of all the things that had made him real. She would build her own kinds of walls to protect herself from the near constant reminders of death's presence here. But it had crept, in any way intruding. Now the idea of leaving Sahil to lie hard in the dirt, as alone as he would have been in the last grisly seconds of his life, unsettled her. She thought again of what he would heard other beast keepers whispering earlier in the day. People were now saying that Sahil had waited until late last night to make a run for it. They said he would gone into the greater jungle hoping to find freedom and instead had found a creature that killed for amusement. She winced. The Shetani's murderous reputation was frightening enough, but it was the fact that the monster had evaded capture for so many years that set her on edge. Misunderstanding the look on her face, Mama took Koffi's hand and squeezed. I promise, we'll come back, she whispered. Now come on, let's go. Without any words, she ducked out of the hut. Koffi glanced back at Sahil's body at a final time, then followed. Outside the sun was setting, cast against a bruised sky, curiously fractured by strange black fissures amid the clouds. Those fissures would fade to a gentler violent as monsoon season drew nearer. But they would never truly disappear. They had been there all Koffi's life, an indelible mark left by the rupture. She hadn't been alive a century ago when it had happened, but elders deep in their palm wine still spoke of it on occasion. Drunk, voices slurred. They recalled the violent tremors that had splintered the earth like a clay pot. The dead who had strewn Lkossa street in the aftermath. They talked of a relentless blistering heat that had driven men mad. Koffi and every other child of her generation had suffered the consequences of the madness. After the rupture, her people, the Jeeds, had been dwindled down by the war and poverty, easy to divide and regulate. Her eyes traveled along the cracks in the sky, weaving overhead like thin black threads. For a second she thought she felt something as she surveyed them. Koffi, Mama called over her shoulder, come now. Just as quickly the feeling was gone. The Koffi kept on. In silence she and Mama whisked the mud bricks hut crammed along the night zoo's edge. Other beast keepers were getting ready too. They passed men and women dressed in shabby tunics, some nursing freshly bandaged wounds from encounters with beasts, some marked by some permanent injuries like old scars and missing fingers. Each carried a quiet defeat in their hunched shoulders and downcast eyes that Koffi hated but understood. Most of the night zoo's workers were of the JDZ, people like her, which meant the show should go on this evening. But Sahil's absence would be felt. He hadn't had real family here, but he would have been one of them, bound to this place by bad luck and bad choices. He deserved more than quick prayers in a rundown, but he deserved a proper burial with token coins placed in his palms to ensure he made it to the Godlands. But no one here could afford to spray any coin. Baaz made sure of that. The chorus of shrieks, roars, and snarls filled the aventitude as they reached the crooked wooden post marking the end of the beastkeeper's hut, trading red dirt for an expanse of green lawns filled with cages of every size, shape, and color. Koffi I, one of the nearest her, and the eight-headed Nirvana snake, met her gaze curious. She followed Mama's lead around cages of white pygmy elephants, chimpanzees, a pair of giraffes grazing quietly in their paddock. They passed a dome-shaped aviary full of black and white impalers, barely mindful to cover their heads as the birds beat their massive wings and sent sparks of lightning into the sky. Baaz Mom's night zoo was rumored to hold over 100 exotic species within its confines. In her 11 years of contracted service to it, Koffi had never bothered to count. They moved quickly between other enclosures, but when they reached the ground's border, her steps slowed. The black steel cage kept her was separate from the others, and the good reason. In the dying light, only its stark silhouette was visible. What it contained within was veiled in shadow. "It's all right, Mama," beckoned even as Koffi instinctively faltered. "I checked on Deco earlier today and he was fine." She approached the cage at the same time. Something in its corner shifted. Koffi tensed. "Mama." "Come now, Deco." Mama kept her voice low as she withdrew a rust-speckled key from her pocket to insert into the massive padlock. In answer, there was an ominous hiss, slick as a blade. Koffi's toes curled in the grass, and from the cage's shadows a beautiful creature emerged. His body was reptilian and sinewy, entirely adorned by iridescent scales that seemed to hold 1,000 colors captive each time he moved. Clever curtain eyes danced back and forth as Mama tinkered with the lock, and when the beast flicked his forked black tongue between the bars, a smell like smoke tinged the dry air. Koffi swallowed. The first time she would seen a Jokomoto as a little girl, she had thought they were creatures spun from glass, fragile and delicate. She had been wrong. There was nothing delicate about a fire-breathing lizard. "Get the hasra leaf out," Mama directed now. At once Koffi pulled 3 dry, silver-veined leaves from a drawstring pouch at her hip. They were exquisite, shimmering with white resin that left her fingertips sticky when she pinched them. Her heartbeat hammered as the door to the Jokomoto cage swung open and his head swiveled. Mama covered her nose with one hand and then raised the other in warning. "Steady." Koffi went stock still as the Jokomoto bolted from his cage and slunk toward her on long clawed feet. She had waited until then, and he was few yards away of her before tossing the leaves high into the air. Deco's eyes caught them, and he lunged impossibly quick. There was a flash of pointed teeth, a merciless crunch, and then they were gone. Koffi stuffed her hands back into her pockets quickly. Jokomotos weren't native of this part of Ishoza. They were creatures from the western part of the continent, said to the children of Tiumbu, the desert god. At roughly the same size as a common monitor lizard, Deco wasn't the largest, fastest, or strongest animal kept in the night zoo, but he was the most temperamental, which also made him the most dangerous. One wrong move and he could set the entire place ablaze. It was all too easy to recall the nasty burns on beastkeepers, Who had forgotten that? Her heartbeat only settled after Hasira's leaves power took effect and the lurid yellow glow in his eyes slightly dimmed. I have got it from here. Koffi was already moving behind Deco with the leather harness and leash snatched from a nearby post. She stooped down, and the moment she fastened its worn straps under his scaled belly and tightened them, she relaxed. The flimsy binds were a silly thing to take comfort in. They would do nothing if Deco's mood soared, but he was subdued, at least for now. Make sure those binds are secure. Koffi looked up, done. Pleased, Mama bent to give Deco's snout a demonstrative pat. That's a good boy. Koffi rolled her eyes as she straightened. I don't know why you talk to him like that. Why not? Mama shrugged. Jokomotos are spectacular beasts. They are dangerous. Sometimes things that seem dangerous are just misunderstood. Mama said the word with a strange sadness before patting Deco again. This time, as if to affirm the point, he gently nudged her palm. This seemed to cheer her back up. Besides, just look at him, he's in good spirits tonight. Koffi started to argue, then thought better of it. Her mother had always had a strange empathy for the night zoo's inhabitants. She changed the subject. You know, that was the last of the Hasra's leaf. She patted her empty pouch for emphasis. We're out until more is delivered. Even now, wisps of the leaves' cloying fragrance still suffused the air. Inadvertently, she caught a lingering whiff of it, and a pleasant thrum trickled the edges of her senses. Koffi. Mama's voice turned sharp, cleaving through that momentary bliss. She was still holding Deco's leash, but frowning. You know better, don't breathe it in. Koffi shook herself, unnerved, then fanned at the air around her until the smell was gone. Plucked from shrubs along the greater jungle border, Hasira's leaf was a sedative herb potent enough to knock out a mature bull elephant when consumed. It wasn't wise to inhale its fragrance at a close range, even in small quantities. We should get moving. Mama's gaze had locked on an illuminated tent set across the night zoo's grounds. Other beastkeepers were already heading toward it, with animals in tow. From here it was no larger than a candle red gold flame, but Koffi recognized it. The hammer was where tonight's show would be held. Mama glanced her way again. Ready? Koffi grimaced. She was never ready for shows at the night zoo. But that hardly mattered. She would just move to stand on the other side of Deco when she noticed something. What's wrong? Mama asked. Nothing. Koffi's raised eyebrow. You tell me. Now Koffi squinted. Something was off about her mother's expression, but she couldn't quite tell what. She studied it harder. The two of them looked similar. Shoulder-length back twists, broad nose and full mouth framed by a heart-shaped face, but there was nothing else. And there was about something to be. The Mama tonight, you look different. Oh, Mama looked uncharacteristically flustered. There was no doubt about it. Then Koffi named it, that foreign emotion in her mother's eyes. Koffi was embarrassed to realize the thing she hadn't recognized was happiness. Did something happen? Mama shifted her weight from the foot to foot. Well, I was going to wait until tomorrow to tell you. After what happened with Sahil earlier, it didn't seem right to discuss it. But Baaz pulled me aside for a few hours ago. She said he calculated our debt balance and we're almost paid off. What? Something like shock and joy erupted in Koffi. Deco snorted at this sudden outburst, sending tendrils of smoke into the air, but she ignored him. How? Those extra hours we took on added up. Mama offered a small smile. She was standing straighter, like a plant coming into full bloom. We only have 2 more payments left, and we could probably pay off in few days. Sheer disbelief coursed through Koffi, and that we're done. Done? Mama nodded. The debt will be paid, interest and all. Koffi felt a long-held tension within her release as she exhaled. Like most things in the night zoo, the terms and conditions held by its indentured workers only benefited one person. 11 years of service with Mama had taught her that, but they had won. Beaten Baaz at his own wretched game, they were going to leave. It was so rare that beastkeepers managed to pay back their debts. The last one who had managed it had done so at least a year ago, but now it was their turn. Where will we go? Koffi asked. She asked, could barely believe she was really posing the question. They would never gone anywhere. She barely remembered life outside the night zoo. Mama closed the gap between them and took Koffi's hand in hers. We can go wherever we want. She spoke with a fervor Koffi had never heard before. You and I will leave this place and start over somewhere else, and we'll never ever look back. We'll never return. Never return? Koffi considered the words all her life. She would long for them, dreamed of them, hearing them now. However, they felt strangely different. What? Mama noted her changed expression immediately. What is it? It's just Koffi didn't know if they were right words, but she tried. We will never see anyone here ever again. Mama's expression softened with understanding. You will miss it. Koffi nodded quietly, angrily, with herself for doing so. She didn't necessarily love working at the night zoo, but it was the only home she would ever known, the only life she would ever known. She thought of the other beast keepers, not quite a family, but certainly people she cared about. I'll miss them too, sighed Mama, gently reading her thoughts, but they wouldn't want us to stay here. Koffi, not if we didn't have to. I just wish we could help them, Koffi murmured. I wish we could help all of them. Mama offered a small smile. You are a compassionate girl. You lead with your heart like your father. Koffi shifted uncomfortably. She didn't like being compared to Baba. Baba was gone. Sometimes, so you can't lead with your heart, said Mama gently. You have to think with your head. A horn's brassy trumpeting split the air without warning, its summons rising from the distant temple of Lkossa to reverberate across the night zoo lawns in long sonorous notes. The boat stiffened as the sounds of newly agitated bees filled the ground around them, and Deco bared his teeth in anticipation. The city's saw horn had at last announced nightfall. It was time. Again, Mama's eyes flitted from the hammer to Koffi. It almost over. Little Ponia seed, she said softly, a touch of hope in her voice. She hadn't called that in years. I know how hard it has been, but it's almost over. I promise we are going to be okay. Koffi didn't answer as Mama tugged Deco, leash to lead him toward the massive tent. She followed, but kept a step behind. Her eyes cast wide, holding in their gaze the final remnants of the sky, the color of blood. Mama's words echoed in her mind. We are going to be okay. They would be okay. She knew that now, but her thoughts still lingered on something else, someone else, Sahil. He wasn't okay. He would never be okay again. She couldn't help but think of him, then of the boy she was with the crooked smile. She couldn't help but think of the monster that had killed him and wonder who it would take next.